Morning, happy Sabbath. Thank you again for your invitation to come and share with you from the Word of the Lord. Today I'm going to share with you from the Word of the Lord as it is recorded in the book of Mark. Mark chapter 8. Okay, to study the book of Mark, we need to know about how the book of Mark is written, or the style of writing. Okay, the style of writing. There's a very unique way how Mark portrays things in multiple occasions in the book of Mark. It is what we call the story within a story. Okay, story within a story. So you're telling a story, then you jump to another story, and then you come back to the original story. All right, and usually that two stories are kind of interrelated. Okay, it kind of gives us some lessons together. Okay, the famous one in Mark chapter 5. Okay, Mark chapter 5, it talks about the healing of a 12-year-old Jairus' daughter with a woman who had the issue of blood for 12 years. Okay, so we can have a whole sermon on that. A lot of interesting facts that was written there for us to learn. Right, so that is, I would say, one of the most famous one, story within a story. Then we have Mark chapter 14, the first part. The first part is talking about, the central story is about the story of the ultimate love and generosity of Mary in breaking the alabaster box, or spikenard, in the midst of another story of ultimate selfishness, hatred, and betrayal. Okay, so you can go ahead and read on that. The second part of Mark 14 is another story within a story. We talk about Peter. Okay, it begins with the scene of Peter appearing in the judgment hall. Okay, and end with the story of his denial of his master. But in the middle was a trial of Jesus by the Sanhedrin and the high priest. Okay, there's another one in chapter 3. Okay. Here it describes about the zeal of his brothers, or his relatives actually, trying to stop Jesus from his work. They think that he has gone cuckoo. Okay, so they come to see Jesus. But there was Jesus. In the second part of the story, talk about Jesus was teaching the people and declaring to the people, that he had come to destroy Satan, and pleaded to the people to respond to the call of the Holy Spirit. And then at the end, remember, the story went back again to talk about, someone telling Jesus, hey, your brothers and your mother were outside waiting for you. Okay? So it's actually a story within a story. So remember that kind of arrangement. Now we go to chapter 8. Okay, chapter 8 is a long one, but basically it follows the same style. Today we are going to study the middle first. Okay, what is a middle story? Okay, we have just read just now. Thank you, Dr. O, for reading that. It was about the healing of a blind man. Okay, healing of a blind man. Okay, talking about healing of a blind man, there were 5 incidences, okay, where the Bible recorded how Jesus healed the blind man. All right, I've shared with you one or two earlier. There was a story about 2 blind men crying after Jesus. That was in Matthew chapter 9. And then Jesus just turned to them and said, "According to your faith, be it unto you." And then they were able to see. Then there was another story about healing of Bartimaeus, both recorded in Matthew as well as in Mark. Okay, and remember the story. Bartimaeus was shouting, "Son of David, have mercy on me." People asked him to keep quiet, but he keeps shouting the more. And then Jesus called him. And he came to Jesus, and Jesus asked him, "What do you want me to do for you?" He said, I want to see. And what did Jesus do? Jesus said, go thy way, thy faith hath made thee whole. And immediately, Bartimaeus was able to see. Okay, there was a third story that I've shared with you some time ago, probably 2-3 years ago, about a man that was born blind. A man that was born blind, recorded in John chapter 9. This time, this blind man did not come to Jesus, but Jesus went to him. Jesus went to him, and Jesus not just say, according to your faith, you are healed, or go, and you are healed. But Jesus took some mud and anointed his eyes with clay and asked him to go and wash at the pool of Siloam. Did Jesus have less power that he had to do that? Well, if you remember, why Jesus used the clay, I believe that it's because he wanted to show them. If you read before and after, before that Jesus was actually chased out from the wherever he was, because he said, before Abraham I was. He was declaring that he was equal with God. Okay? So here is a story that was followed that incident, and that's why Jesus used the clay and anoint this blind man who was born blind from his birth. Have you seen someone who was born blind? Many times their facial feature is actually disfigured. Okay, because their eyes were not well developed. By the very act of using clay and anoint the man's eye, he is declaring to the people that he was the one that gave eyesight. He was the one that gave you the eyes to see. He was the master potter. Recreate a man who was born blind that he was able to see. Okay, that was a story about the man that was born blind. Okay, there was another story that was recorded, only one text, okay, in Matthew chapter 12, verse 22. Story of the people brought Jesus someone who was possessed with devil, and he was both blind and dumb. And it was recorded that Jesus just healed him. One text, miracle. Now come to the fifth story in Bethsaida, where the people brought him a blind man. Okay, the number 4 was also people brought a blind person to Jesus. The story number 5 was the same. The people brought this blind man to Jesus. Let us turn our Bible to chapter 8, verse 22. Chapter 8, verse 22. And he came to Bethsaida, and they brought a blind man unto him, and besought him to touch him. Verse 23. And he took the blind man by the hand, and led him out of the town. And when he had spit on his eyes, and put his hands upon him, he asked him if he see aught. You see, remember the first two incidences where Jesus healed the blind man, but the two blind men, and next the Bartimaeus, and some story says Bartimaeus and his friend. Jesus just said, and they were healed. Jesus just said it, and they were healed. But here was different. Here it says Jesus took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the town, and spit on his eye and put his hand upon him and asked him whether he was able to see. Was he able to see? Was he able to see? Verse 24, and he looked up and said, I see men as trees walking. What do you gather from this text? I see men walking like trees. That means this man was actually, once upon a time, able to see. If not, how do you know what his tree looked like? Isn't it? But he saw men like tree walking. So he was someone who was able to see, not like the blind man that was born blind, who had never seen before. But this was a man who was able to see. And when Jesus anointed him, he describing what he saw. He saw men as trees walking. Verse 25. After that, he put his hands again upon his eyes and made him look up. And he was restored, and he saw every man clearly. Very interesting story. But why did Jesus have to do that? Why don't he just heal this blind man like he healed Bartimaeus? Or, heal the two blind men before that, before Bartimaeus? Many times many years ago, when I read this one, I always puzzled. Why Jesus had to do that? Why he has to partially heal the man and then ask him, what do you see? He has not enough power, or Jesus had not enough sleep on that day. This is the beauty of the writing in the book of Mark. There was a central story about healing the blind man. But remember, it's a story within a story. So we need to look at what happened before and what happened after. So let us turn to the first one, beginning from Mark chapter 8, verse 10. Okay, with your Bible, you turn to Mark chapter 8, verse 10. Okay, this was a time when he fed about 4,000 men. It was, in the Gentile area. There was people who followed him and heard him, and they were, have nothing to eat. And Jesus asked them asked his disciples how many loaves you have, and they answered 7. Then they let the people sit down, and then Jesus blessed the bread and the fish that they had, and they eat. And those people who ate that day was 4,000 men. It was in the Gentile region. Okay? And verse 10 begins what we want to look at today. Verse 10, it says, straightway he entered into the ship with his disciples and came to the parts of Dalmanutha. And the Pharisees came to him and beginning to question him, asking him for a sign from heaven, tempting him. If you are the Son of God, if you are the Messiah, then show us some sign, miracles from heaven, then we will believe in you. But what did Jesus answer? He sighed deeply in his spirit and said, why does this generation seek after a sign? Verily I say unto you, there shall be no sign be given unto this generation. Jesus had already showed himself to these people with all those miracles and signs. Yet the people still did not believe. They wanted more signs. So for people who were purposely blinded themselves, Jesus is saying, no more sign will touch your heart. So he's not going to do anything just for the curiosity's sake. Verse 13, the Bible says he left them and entering into the ship again and departed to the other side. So the whole story started with these people who were blind. They were trying to tempt him, and they tried to ask him, to do some miracles. Jesus' ministry already, have consisted of a long chain of miraculous signs, but they refused to accept him based upon what were already shown to them. So they were actually the blind Pharisees. So Jesus left them and he entered a ship and went to the other side of the lake or the sea. That's the background, the first part of the story. Now, verse 14, while they were in the ship, what happened? We have just met the blind Pharisees. Let us see verse 14, the second part of the story. Now the disciples, Mark wrote there in verse 14, now the disciples had forgotten to take bread. Neither had they in the ship with them more than one loaf. So they have one loaf of bread only in the ship as they travel to the other side. Verse 15, Jesus was trying to teach them some lessons. So Jesus charged them and said, take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of the leaven of Herod. The disciples reasoned among themselves, They said, Jesus said, we should be aware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Herod. It's because we never bring the bread. It's because we don't have bread. The disciples were slow to understand what Jesus meant. So verse 17, when Jesus knew it, he said unto them, why you reason like that? Because you have no bread. You do not understand. Have your heart been so hardened that you could not understand, having eyes, but see ye not? Here actually Jesus was quoting Jeremiah chapter 5, verse 21. Basically, Jesus is telling the disciples, don't be like your ancestors. Like Jeremiah told the Israelites, you have eyes but you do not see. Don't be like your ancestors and having ears and you cannot hear and cannot understand. And Jesus continued to say, do you remember not? Verse 19, when I break the 5 loaves among the 5,000, how many basketful of fragments that you took up? They answered him and said, 12. Then Jesus said, no, I fed. Then when the 7 among the 4,000, how many baskets were full of fragments that you took up? That is just happened, okay, just happened. And they said, 7 baskets. Verse 21, Jesus said unto them, how is it that you do not understand? So Jesus here is saying, how come you also blind? Remember the other side of the shore, Jesus already met these Pharisees who were willingly blinding themselves. Okay? And here there was another group, his own disciples, and they also could not see. They could not understand. So Jesus is saying, how come you are blind? How come you can't understand? So you see, this is story within story. You read the whole context, then you understand why Jesus actually healed the blind man. You see, Jesus encountered the blind Pharisees who refused to see. But at least the disciples were kind of sincere, but they still could not see. They were still blind. So in that context, we come to this story about healing the blind man. And Jesus healed the blind man in 2 stages. So Jesus said, don't be like your ancestors, that you cannot see. How is it that you cannot understand? They seem to be as blind as the Pharisees. Now come back, to the Bible from verse 27. And Jesus went out with his disciple into the town of Caesarea Philippi. And by the way, he asked his disciples. So Jesus always teaching the disciples. One of the best way of teaching is by asking questions. So Jesus asked them a question. Whom do men say that I am? You can imagine they raise their hand and say, hey, some people say that you are John the Baptist. Another one say you are Elias. Some say you are one of the prophets. Well, good. Verse 29. He said unto them, but whom say ye that I am? Who do you think that I am? There you can imagine, Peter raised his hand always. Before even he raised his hand, probably he said, thou art the Christ, you are the Messiah. Well, in the context of what we have read so far, it seems like Peter already had his eyes open, right? Yes, that is the right answer. But what happened after that? When you have seen some light, God is going to reveal to you more light. That is what happened in the next verse. Verse 31. And Jesus began to teach them more things. You have gotten something right? Yes, good. But now Jesus is going to teach you more things. And he began to teach them what? That the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected of the elders and of the chief priests and the scribes and be killed. And after 3 days, rise again. After 3 days, rise again. You may think that, Peter and the disciples' eyes were already open. They say that Jesus, you are, the Messiah. You are the one that we are waiting for. But sad to say, their eyes were not fully open. They did not understand fully. So when Jesus trying to teach them more truths, telling them that the Son of Man must be rejected and suffered many things and be killed. And on the 3rd day, he will rise again. What did they do? Verse 32. Jesus spake that saying openly. Means Jesus actually very frankly telling them in simple terms that he was going to be killed. What happened after that? Peter took him aside. You can imagine Peter grabbed him to the side, trying to stop him from saying these kind of things and began to rebuke him. Verse 33. Jesus turned around and looked on his disciples. He rebuked Peter, saying, get thee behind me, Satan, for thou savorest not the things that are be of God, but the things that be of man. Who was really the blind man here? Was it Jesus? Of course not. Because we have the hindsight. But at that moment, Peter was having what we call impaired eyesight. Yes, he was the one that declared that Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus is the Son of God. He is Christ. But he was having an impaired vision. He did not see clearly. His understanding of Messiah was different. His Messiah cannot die. But Jesus said, I am going to be betrayed and die. So, Peter was the one having blurred vision. Not as Peter said, Jesus, you have something wrong. But the one that have something wrong up there and need healing was Peter. Their eyes were still impaired in their eyesight. They could not comprehend fully. They could not comprehend fully. Then Jesus continued on to teach his disciples. Those who are willing to learn, they will come after me, and let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Whosoever will save his life shall lose it, but whosoever shall lose his life for my sake and the gospel's sake, the same shall save it. What shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Whomsoever therefore shall be ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him also shall the Son of Man be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with his holy angels. Here Jesus calling himself the Son of Man. Where did you see the word the Son of Man in the Old Testament? We're going to study the book of Daniel in the next quarter. The Son of Man was the Messiah that came before the Ancient of Days. First mentioned in the book of Daniel. So Jesus is saying, I am the Son of Man. I'm the Godhead that has taken the body of a man. My mission need to be accomplished. Jesus was pointing to the judgment days when he said that he was the Son of Man. You know, the whole story tells us that the disciples need Jesus. They needed Jesus to continue to touch them, continue to show them, to teach them so that they can see clearly. And that is the meaning of the central story of Jesus healing the blind man in 2 stages. Do you think that Jesus had not enough sleep on that day, that he had a sleep of power, that the blind man had to be healed in 2 stages? No. Friends, he did it for his disciples. He did it for you and me. You know, this story is for us. Because Jesus said that we are also poor, blind, and wretched. Remember the story, or not the story, the message to the Laodiceans. Jesus said to the Laodiceans that you are blind. You need the eye salve from me. You need to be healed. And your healing cannot be just, come and go, that's it. But your healing needs a continual touch of Jesus. A continual touch of Jesus on your heart. And apply his eye salve on your eye. That you will be healed. That you and me will be healed from our blindness, that we may be able to see clearly. The story continues on that Jesus brought his three disciples up into the mountain. Before that, chapter 9, verse 1, what did Jesus say? Verily I say unto you, that there be some of them that stand here, which shall not taste of death, till they have seen the kingdom of God coming with power. And after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, and lead them up into the high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his raiment was shining exceedingly white like snow. No fuller on this earth can achieve that. And there appeared unto them Elias with Moses, and they were talking with Jesus. Friends, Jesus is on the same business today. He wants to open our eyes. Not only open our eyes to be able to see the meaning of his words and his calling, but friends, he has promised to you that he is going to open your eyesight, that you will see heaven. Peter, James, and John, that they have seen heaven in its miniature form. But today, Jesus is promising you that he is going to open your eyesight. Your physical eye will be open. You will be able to see heaven. We need the touch of Jesus. We need the touch of Jesus repetitively. And that's why Jesus went to the extent of healing the blind man in 2 stages. Jesus said, one touch is not enough. You need to come again. You need to come again. That your eyesight will be perfect. If you let Jesus work in your life, you will see the glory of heaven descending upon the earth. You know, the Pharisees in the beginning, they refused. Jesus had actually shown them many miracles, yet they refused. They still ask for more sign before they want to believe. Yes, the disciples were also blind. They were not able to see clearly. Even after many teachings, their eyes were still half open and half sleeping. But Jesus promised them and said, among you, some shall not see death until they see the kingdom of heaven coming with power. And he showed them in the Mount of Transfiguration, Jesus with Moses and Elijah. And Jesus had promised that he's going to come again. And this time, not just Moses and Elijah, but the whole heaven is going to come. Are you ready, friends? Are you ready to receive Jesus on that day? Do you want to be ready? If you want to be ready, you need Jesus every day. You need Jesus to apply the eye salve on your eye so that you and me will be able to see clearly. And one day, and the day is soon, he will open up heaven to show us, just like Peter, James, and John, seeing a miniature of heaven. We are going to see the whole universe welcoming us into the kingdom of heaven. That is our great hope. That is what we are waiting for. And that's what Jesus wants to accomplish in you and in me. To heal your eyesight to the ultimate, that you can see beyond what is here today till eternity. May the Lord bless us as we study more and as we know him more, and we will see the glorious things out of his word and be encouraged until that day.